fans of MTG Burgeoning. What is going on? Here we are again. We are back with some more tales from MTG Burgeoning. And if you are looking for a video that is featuring a deck tech or featuring some sort of reward series or a top 10, this is not going to be the video for you, because we are just going to kick back, chill, sort out some cards, and we are just going to talk about some Magic memories. Now, the last time that we left off with our LGS series, we were talking about, what was it? It was the EDH League. And we had talked about the different decks that I used in each of the full seasons that I played. And I say full seasons because there was a time in which I had just started playing in the Commander EDH League, but it was right towards the tail end of a current season. And because of that, there was just no way mathematically that I was going to be able to accumulate enough points to make it to the Invitational. Because that's what ends up happening at the end of each of the Commander League seasons. The top 8 point getters throughout that particular season, well, they qualify for the Store Championship Invitational, which is, the eight Commander players that earn the most points are seated in 2 pods, and then the top 2 of each of those pods go on for the championship. So when I first jumped into the league, it was probably like 3 or 4 weeks left, maybe something like that. And that first deck I brought was the Xenagos deck. And I still remember the very first game, sitting down to my very first pod in that Commander League, thinking, oh man, I am gonna just crush these people, these other players, with this Xenagos deck. It was the first time I had entered into the league, and I'm like, oh, I've got this. Yeah, I didn't. I wasn't even close. In fact, I think it was turn 5. The entire table was gone by turn 5, and it just happened that the player who won that game during that particular pod ended up winning the Store Championship for that season once the Invitational took place. And he was running a mono green Omnath, Locus of Mana deck. And he was just doing all kinds of things where he was, protecting his guys with Shroud and bouncing elves back and lands and accumulating mana. And before we knew it, it was turn 5 and the table was over. So I was sitting there like, wow, that was my very first game in the league, and I lasted about 5 rounds, five rounds of turns. I was like, oh, okay, that's a little more than humbling, I suppose. But that was at the tail end of the current league. It was not as if I had started all the way from the beginning and had a chance to adjust and learn the players and learn their different favored deck building archetypes and how they play, and establish a baseline for trying to read them and things like that. That's a big deal when you start to know the players more than their cards. It gives you such a huge advantage, and that just was something that I was unable to overcome to get enough points for that first Invitational. So that acts as a good segue to the very first full season of participation. I took this Xenagos deck and I entered into the first full season with it. Now, for me, I wanted to just have the one deck. This is what I would do for each subsequent season thereafter. I would play with the same deck, play with it, experience it, live it, refine it, revise it, and try to make it stronger and stronger based upon the metagame of that league. And in so doing, you prepare for certain things that might happen with different players you might come across. And it was always a bit of a challenge if there were new players halfway through. You really had no idea what they were playing, what their preferred archetypes were, how they played. So that was the strategy that I took, is I just wanted to keep the same deck, and then just continuously refine it till it got to the point where I was more than happy with its performance, and then just hopefully ride it out based upon the point system and try to make that invitational. So when I first entered into this first full year with this Xenagos deck, it was a deck that really focused on green, red, and Gruul creatures that entered the battlefield and had specific abilities when they entered the battlefield. Yes, the haste enabling and the +X was definitely important because, I mean, let's be honest, Xenagos is awesome. But at that point in time, when I was first starting out with the deck, it was more about entering the battlefield triggers. I'm not sure why that was. I don't know if that was the at-home Commander metagame that kind of shaped the deck to be that way. But over time, well, the deck began to take a different look. I was much more focused on getting the fatties in play, getting some biggins out there, making sure they had some kind of evasion, like flying if they were some dragons, like trample if they were pretty much every green creature ever. And in addition, there were some other facets of the deck that I definitely added as time went on, because I didn't want it to just be reliant on one-shotting with, biggins created by Xenagos, because, that's going to get, you're going to be able to plan for that, particularly if the other players in the league recognize that I was just playing with the same deck. It would have been a lot easier to prepare spot removal and other things like that if they were just expecting me to be able to win each stinking game just by turning a huge biggin sideways. So there were other things I had included as well. I definitely remember including a little token package so I can take advantage of a timely Gaia's Cradle activation with a Comet Storm. That won me a lot of good games. No one was expecting that kind of level of direct damage. When you got tokens going into play from the Avenger of Zendikar, Chancellor of the Forge. What are some of the other ones? There are some other ones I'm not thinking. Living Hive, Rapacious One. Create all of these tokens and then tap that Gaia's Cradle, even if we have to search it out with a crop rotation. Cast that Comet Storm with the multi-kicker. That was very nice. Also had a small little mill package, because I did have a copy of Altar of Dementia in the deck, and I did have success with milling out some players as well. So the different ways in which to win, it was really working out. And I was fortunate enough that by the time the season ended, I did make the top 8 in the Invitational. Now, I don't remember what my exact ranking was. I was on the bottom 4. So I want to say I was probably 6th or 7th. I was somewhere around the bottom 4. So I was lucky enough to make it to the Invitational and made it in with the top 8. So I remember pod 1, because, the top 8 split into 2 pods, and pod 1 and pod 2, of course, 2 different pods, and whoever won each pod moved on to the very final, the championship pod, and then whichever player after the winner of the pod accumulated the most points during that game, they made it to the championship pod 2, and then from that point on, in that 4-player championship pod, it was not about points, it was just about who's going to win the game and become store champion. And I remember, of course, pod 1 of my very first Invitational, and I was fortunate enough, everything was working out very well. In 2 different turns, let me reframe that. In one turn later in the game, I was able to one-shot an opponent. I don't remember how. It was through combat. I don't even remember the creature that did it. And then with the last 2 opponents remaining, I was able to use my multi-kicked Comet Storm to eliminate the other 2 players. And I was able to make it to the final pod because I won the game, and then the other guy who made it had the most points during that particular contest. So we both went in, and this was a pretty big deal for me because this was my first full season. I hadn't played in an EDH league before, again, outside of just, joining towards the end of the season and in the very first, my very first appearance in the league. So we get to the final table. Now there's no points. Now it's just all you have to win to become champion. So I'm there with my Xenagos. I am playing against, let me think here, I have a 5-color Chromat deck. That was the number 1 seed. He made it to in the other pod that I was not in. He was the number 1 seed the whole year. He was playing 5-color Chromat. The guy that was with me in the first pod that we got to the final pod, he was playing Damia, Sultai Damia, Sage of Stone. And then the other player was playing Reese the Redeemed Token, Selesnya Tokens. So the pod is going on, and for unfortunate reasons, the Selesnyan Token player could not get any lands to save him at all. He was just getting hammered. He was getting land screwed. He couldn't get any lands. He was just pretty much a non-factor. And then the Damia Sultai, he was doing what he needed to do. And, you know, he was in the right colors. However, it was the 5-color Chromat that was really a problem. He was ramping out. Oh, it was just ridiculous how much he was ramping for a 5-color deck. And I mean, I know he's got Chromat as the commander, but holy mackerel, he was really becoming a massive threat. And by the time I think it was like turn 6 or turn 7 came around, he was threatening with, he had tapped out everything to put out, I think, it was like 2 more mana rocks. Like he put out like a Gilded Lotus, and I want to say he put out some other, like, it was just some other massive artifact mana rock. I can't remember what it was, but one of them was definitely Gilded Lotus, because he used the Gilded Lotus to tap and cast this other thing, but he was completely tapped out. And I'm like, oh man, this guy is going to wreck us. We're going to end up, he's going to just run the table. So I failed to mention earlier one of the other little packages I had included in the Xenagos deck, one that I did not use with any degree of regularity, but for the purposes of being in a championship invitational pod, I thought it was time to pull it out. Yes, I did have included in that deck Blightsteel Colossus. And with the Chromat guy all tapped out, I decided it was time that I had to do what I could to take him out. Now, at this time, I did not have Xenagos in play, so that was going to be a burden, because I was not able to get Blightsteel in play with the haste needed to swing and deal the game-ending effect to that player. However, what I did have in my hand and enough mana to cast is I did have a Tooth and Nail, and the Tooth and Nail, being entwined, allowed me to search out through my library for the Blightsteel Colossus, in addition to a copy of Urabrask the Hidden. And when those 2 creatures came into play, I had the haste I needed to attack the Chromat player with the Blightsteel Colossus and eliminate him from the game, and he was very unhappy about that. And I can understand. It's, in fact, it's a polarizing mechanic, particularly in a format where, let's be honest, you've got 40 life to play with, and you shouldn't have to worry about taking 10 points from something and then dying. But like I said, it was a top 8 invitational, which actually I found to be pretty interesting. Later that evening, after the game was over and the pods were all finished, he had come to me and disclosed, he confided in me that my elimination of him with the Blightsteel Colossus was absolutely the right thing to do from his point of view, because his next turn, he was casting Magistrate's Sphinx with enough mana to Rite of Replicate it 5 times. And that was going to mean that every single player at the table other than him was going to have 10 life. And then that was pretty much going to be the game anyways. So, I mean, 10 life down for me, 10 poison counters for you. And then that was a relief, because he was presenting with a very scary board. And it just so happened, time went on, and I was able to pull it out. And I was the invitational winner in my very first full season in my LGS's EDH League. I was beyond happy. I was beyond surprised. It was a very great experience. The prizes were absolutely amazing. I believe we drafted, a couple sealed boxes from the Vault lore. And being the store champion, I had first pick in each of those 2 drafts. So I ended up getting the Umezawa's Jit and the Dark Depths. And I was fortunate enough to get the Dark Depths Merit Lodge token all foiled in the same draft. And that's on top of a ton of other prizes that were just amazing. That was quite the season. Season 1, Xenagos God of Revels Store Championship. The memories. This is MTG Burgeoning, folks. Your channel for magic memories.